When people think about The Who, their minds immediately go to the chaos, the rebellion, and the unrelenting force of a band that seemed impossible to tame. Pete Townshend smashing guitars, Keith Moon destroying his drum kit, Roger Daltrey screaming into the microphone like he was fighting against the entire world, John Entwistle, quiet but monstrous on bass, holding it all together with thunder. The Who weren't just a rock band. They were a storm that shook the foundation of music in the 1960s and 70s. They embodied aggression, destruction, and defiance. Songs like My Generation captured the youth's frustration. Albums like Tommy and Quadrophenia redefined what a rock opera could be. And live, they were unmatched. A dangerous and unpredictable force that could either give you the greatest night of your life or leave the stage in total collapse. But behind the myth, there were cracks. By the late 70s, The Who were no longer the same beast. Keith Moon's death in 1978 had gutted the band. They recruited Kenny Jones as his replacement, but it was impossible to replicate Moon's anarchic energy. At the same time, Pete Townshend was battling his own demons. Success had not brought him peace. Instead, it drove him further into addiction, self-doubt, and a desperate search for spiritual meaning. And it was during this turbulent period that Townshend wrote a song that would haunt him for decades. A song that critics dismissed, fans ignored, and Townshend himself regretted ever creating. The track was Don't Let Go the Coat, from the 1981 album Face Dances. On the surface, it was meant to be a spiritual reflection. Townshend was deeply influenced by the Indian spiritual teacher Meher Baba, whose philosophy shaped much of his work outside The Who. The lyrics were personal, centered on clinging to a spiritual guide for strength and direction. But The Who was not built for private meditations or fragile prayers. The Who was built for violence, rebellion, and a refusal to compromise. The disconnect was immediate. Roger Daltrey hated the song. He didn't connect with the words, didn't feel the raw energy he needed to deliver as a vocalist. For Daltrey, The Who was about telling the story of the street, of the anger that people lived with. Don't Let Go the Coat wasn't written for him, and he knew it. Entwistle went along as usual, but his bass lines felt restrained, cautious. Even Kenny Jones, who was already struggling to fit into The Who's legacy, couldn't inject any life into the track. What emerged was a song that sounded hollow, distant, and utterly unlike The Who. Fans could sense it. Critics tore it apart. It lacked the bite, the danger, the electricity that defined the band. Instead of rebellion, it sounded like surrender. Instead of fury, it sounded like retreat. Pete Townshend would later admit that he had lost sight of the band's identity. He was writing for himself, for his spiritual struggles, but he forced those songs into The Who's structure, and Don't Let Go the Coat became the clearest example of that mistake. It didn't belong to The Who. It didn't belong to Daltrey. It was Townshend's private confession, shoved into the mouth of a band that was meant to scream, not whisper. The regret didn't come simply from the song's failure. It came from what the song represented. By 1981, The Who was no longer unified. Townshend was spiraling into alcoholism and drug abuse. Daltrey felt sidelined, constantly at odds with Townshend's direction. Entwistle was increasingly isolated, and Kenny Jones never fully fit in. Don't Let Go the Coat symbolized the collapse of The Who's fire. Fans wanted aggression. They wanted a band that reflected their anger at a changing world. Instead, they got a song that sounded like a sermon. The live performances didn't save it either. When The Who attempted to play it on stage, it fell flat. The audience didn't respond. Daltrey delivered it without conviction. It became clear that this wasn't just a weak track. It was a song that exposed The Who's decline. Townshend, always hypercritical of himself, would later call Face Dance's a compromised album. He admitted that his songwriting was fractured, caught between his solo career, his spiritual devotion, and his crumbling relationship with the band. But Don't Let Go the Coat stood out as the track that best revealed his disconnection. He regretted writing it because it highlighted how far he had drifted from the essence of The Who. The deeper tragedy is that Townshend knew better. He knew what made The Who great. He knew that their identity came from rage, not restraint. But at the time, he was consumed by personal guilt, by his addictions, and by his need for spiritual redemption. Don't Let Go the Coat wasn't a Who song. It was a Townshend solo track dressed up in The Who's clothes, and everyone could tell. Even decades later, when The Who's catalog is celebrated, when their anthems are played in stadiums, Don't Let Go the Coat is remembered only as a mistake. It isn't revived in concerts. It isn't embraced by fans. It sits in the shadows, a song the band tried and failed to make their own. And Pete Townshend, looking back, could only admit what many already knew, that it should never have been written for The Who in the first place. This wasn't just about one track. It was about what that track revealed.